Brian Epstein was the first manager of the best rock band of the 60s, the Beatles. He was the one to discover the Fab Four and showed them a path towards never-ending fame and success. Brian was born to one of the richest Jewish families in Liverpool, and he was very disciplined and had a very charismatic personality. He died at the age of 32 due to a drug overdose, but he left a shining legacy behind him. Today, we are going to find out the top 10 facts about Brian Epstein, who everyone calls the fifth Beatle. But before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel below. Also, ring the bell icon to stay connected with my uploads. Thank you for being so supportive. Number 10. Before getting involved in his family business, Brian Epstein was posted in the British Army for 10 months, but he couldn't continue there and was discharged for being mentally unfit. When he was in the Army, it is believed Brian commissioned a tailor to make him an officer's uniform, which he could wear when he was out and about in London. One night in Piccadilly, Brian was arrested by the military police for impersonating an officer, but he managed to avoid a court-martial by agreeing to see an Army psychiatrist, who quickly learned of his sexuality. Brian left the Army, and he came back to Liverpool with a passion for becoming an actor. He joined the Royal School of Dramatic Arts in London, but didn't stay there for long and decided to join his family business. Number 9. Brian was a homosexual from a time when it was illegal to be one in the US. His sexuality was a secret, but the people close to him knew about him being gay and had no problem with it. Lennon used to tease Brian for it, but like the other bandmates, he was very protective of Brian. If anyone outside the band tried making a joke about his sexuality, that person found himself apologizing and ostracized. It is also said in many places that Brian shared an intense relationship with John Lennon, and they spent some time alone with each other in Spain, where homosexuality was legal, but it is not confirmed whether they had a sexual relationship or not. Epstein used to cruise London's gay haunts, employ rent boys, and vacation where laws around homosexuality were more flexible, but he ended up alone and died without having a loyal and loving boyfriend by his side. Number 8. Brian was a true supporter and well-wisher of the Beatles. In early 1967, Brian was about to board a plane from New York to London when he had a strong feeling the plane was going to crash. His escalating drug habit and non-stop work regime had pushed him to the edge of sanity. As he boarded the plane, certain that he was going to die in a plane crash, he passed a note to Nat Weiss, who was the Beatles' legal representative in the US. The note said, "Brown paper jackets for Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band." His life was flashing before his eyes, yet his final words aimed to protect the Beatles from the possibility of getting sued for the controversial album jacket, which features photographs of famous people, at that point, without their permission. Johnny Rogan wrote in Star Makers and Sven Gallus, even on the brink of a nervous breakdown, his devotion to the Fab Four was all-consuming. Brian gave everything so the Beatles could shine and conquer the world. Number 7. Brian was a very strict and disciplined person. When he took charge of the band as their manager, he insisted on having professional ethics in their performances. He provided the band with a code of dressing for every show. The transformation helped the band, and they became more professional. He also banned eating, smoking, and beating during the show, which the Beatles often did. Brian was the reason that the band got the recording contract with Parlophone. Brian got the contract deal with Parlophone barely 6 months after taking over as the manager. Brian booked international venues for the band and made the world aware of their existence. Due to him, a rock band like the Beatles was heard around the globe and even in those places where it was prohibited for a rock band to perform. Number 6. Before becoming the manager of the Beatles, Brian was a successful salesman. When he came back to Liverpool to join his family business, his family opened a record department in one of their stores, and he was put in charge. The department was so successful that the family decided to open a whole store to sell music and records. The name was NEMS, for North End Music Stores, and Epstein became its boss. This store was also a big success. Brian always had a thing for classical music. He began to stock rock and roll records, and record buyers around England liked Epstein and his store. Some of his customers were members of bands, looking for new music to play or to pass the time, and often came to the store. Among those bands were the early Beatles. Number 5. It is interesting to know that Brian became aware of the Beatles through one of his customers. Raymond Jones came to Brian asking about a Beatles album called My Bonnie, which they recorded with Tony Sheridan in Germany. Brian was not able to find it with his sources when he learned that the band was playing nearby in a place called the Cavern. Brian went there with his assistant and was very impressed by their performance. Although he didn't like they were eating and smoking during their performance, he sensed the band's great potential. He met with the band members backstage, where he got to know that they were looking for a manager, and their main goal was to get a recording contract in England. Brian, with no previous previous experience in managing a band, offered himself for the position and got the job immediately. And then we know how he helped the band reach new levels of success. Number 4. At the time of his death, Brian was worth $10 million. The Beatles trusted his decision-making. He advised the band to create the publishing company, Northern Songs. He owned its 9% shares compared to Lennon and McCartney, who owned 20%. When Beatlemania swept the world, money poured in from concerts, record sales, and merchandise. The Beatles saw little of it as the UK tax rate at the time was more than 90%. To remedy that, the Beatles agreed in 1965 to make Northern Songs a public company that was listed on the London Stock Exchange. The main idea of the company was given by Brian. Number 3. Brian wrote his autobiography called A Cellar Full of Noise. His assistant, Derek Taylor, was the ghostwriter of the book. In the prologue of his autobiography, he wrote, "It occurs to me that I'm going to be asked, while in the midst of a busy life, I should take time off from the personal management of my artists, to whom, after all, I have signed myself, to write my own autobiography when I'm not yet 30. It is simply that I wanted to put down at an early stage an accurate account of the emergence of the Beatles and other artists from my own point of view. So much has been said that is exaggerated, inaccurate, extravagant, and open to misinterpretation, that I thought that a detailed account could only help and, I hope, prove of considerable public interest." Cellar Full of Noise gives a detailed story of his discovery and management of the world's most famous rock and roll band. From their initial struggles to the rise to the pinnacle of success, his story includes details of every event relating to the biggest band of rock history. Number 2. While the Beatles were the biggest band Brian managed, there were other artists who rose to fame because of him. From Cilla Black to Jerry and the Peacemakers to Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, Epstein's NEMS musical empire stretched far and wide through Merseyside. He looked after several other artists, but none of them rivaled the Beatles. Brian was so committed to the Beatles that they called him one of us, and at various points, also called him the fifth Beatle. Number 1. The Beatles were on a retreat in Bangor, Wales, when Epstein died on August 27, 1967. The 32-year-old died of an accidental sedative overdose caused by the drug carbitol. He took 6 carbitols to try to sleep, which would have been a normal dose, except they had been mixed with alcohol. A few days earlier, Epstein had been in the Priory Clinic to cure his insomnia and addiction to amphetamines. Less than 3 years after his death, the Beatles fell apart and split. He was the glue holding them together, and with him out of the picture, the band was not able to survive for long. Later in a documentary, McCartney said that the Beatles haven't really been functional since his death. Brian Epstein discovered a talent in the darkness of the cavern that the world will never forget. He gave all he had to the band, and from a father figure to a friend and a leader, he served the Fab Four till his last breath. He died alone without finding true love in his life. Brian will always be remembered as the force behind the Beatles, and his work will never be forgotten. What do you guys have to say about Brian? Comment below. Also, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, take a moment and subscribe. Also, if you like the video, share it with your friends and keep supporting my channel. I will see you guys in the next one.